The first time I felt real fear in my life was not during the war councils, not during the assassination drills my mother forced on me since childhood, and not even during the day I was told I would marry a human. The first time I felt real fear was the night I heard a blade leave its sheath behind me, and I realized the sound was coming from my husband. But I am ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this truly began. My name is Surindra Val, daughter of Empress Naira Val, ruler of the Sovereign Compact, a union of 11 star systems that has existed for over 600 years. I was raised to believe that strength could be measured, weighed, and ranked. My people, the Vale line, have always valued power above softness. We built our empire from claws and steel, and we display our history proudly, carved into the walls of every palace we own. So when my mother told me I would marry a human, I laughed. Humans, in case you do not know them the way I once did not know them, are a newly discovered species. Soft-skinned, short-lived, emotional in a way our scholars found almost embarrassing to study. Their homeworld, a small blue planet tucked into an unimportant corner of the galaxy, had only just been contacted by the greater civilizations a few years earlier. They had no battle fleets worth mentioning, no war record anyone respected. My mother arranged the marriage purely as a political gesture, a symbol of peace offered to a species too small and too weak to ever threaten us. It was, in her words, a marriage of mercy. I did not want mercy. I wanted a warrior. I wanted someone whose name made other rulers uneasy. Instead, I was given Daniel Ashcroft, the son of a human diplomat, a man with kind eyes, an easy smile, and hands that looked like they had never held anything heavier than a cup of tea. I remember the day I met him. He bowed to me, not out of fear, but out of what looked like genuine respect. He said my name correctly on the first try, which none of the other foreign dignitaries ever managed. He asked about my day before he asked about the treaty. I found it strange and a little sad. My court did not hide their amusement. They called him the soft one behind closed doors, though never where he could hear it. My own guards, hardened warriors of House Vale, would exchange glances whenever he entered a room, silently agreeing that this small, gentle creature posed no threat to anyone. I believed the same thing. For a long time, I believed it completely. Daniel never argued with me. He never raised his voice, not once in the 2 years we were married. When I was cold to him in public, to protect my image among my own people, he simply accepted it and waited for me in private, where he would ask if I was all right, if the day had been hard, if there was anything he could do. At first I thought this meant he had no spine. Later I understood it meant something else entirely, but that understanding came far too late, and it came at a terrible cost. There were small details I noticed but never questioned, the way you notice a single strange star in the sky and assume it is simply a trick of the light. He never let anyone see him without his old traveling cloak, the one he had worn since before our wedding, a plain gray thing that looked like it belonged to a much poorer man. I asked him once why he kept it. He said it reminded him of home. I did not push further. He also flinched at loud, sudden sounds, the way a person flinches when a memory has taught their body to expect danger. When a servant once dropped a heavy tray in the hallway outside our chambers, Daniel was on his feet and turned toward the door before I had even registered the noise. He caught himself quickly, laughed it off, said something about human nerves being sensitive. I laughed with him. I did not think to ask why a diplomat's soft, sheltered son would move like that. He also never slept fully. I would wake in the deep hours of the night and find him lying still, eyes closed, breathing even, but somehow I always knew he was aware of the room around him. I told myself this was simply a human trait, something strange about their biology. I never once considered that it might be training, discipline, the kind of alertness you only earn through experience I could not imagine. My mother's court continued to mock him quietly, and I let them, because I too believed the joke was true. I remember one evening at a formal dinner, a cousin of mine, a decorated officer named Vex Turnoth, made a comment just loud enough for the table to hear, saying that the human ambassador's boy must faint at the sight of a training blade. The table laughed. Daniel simply smiled, poured more wine for the guest beside him, and said nothing. I laughed too. I am not proud of that now. There is a particular kind of shame that comes later, in hindsight, when you realize you spent months underestimating someone who was choosing, every single day, to let you underestimate him. I did not know that shame yet. I was still comfortable in my ignorance, still certain that my new husband was exactly what he appeared to be, a gentle accessory to a political arrangement, harmless in every sense of the word. The Sovereign Compact had recently signed a peace treaty with a neighboring alliance, one that had spent decades in low-grade conflict with us over mining rights along a disputed border. The treaty was not popular with everyone. There were factions within our own systems and within theirs who believed peace was a betrayal, who believed strength should never be softened by diplomacy. My mother wanted to celebrate the treaty publicly, to show unity, to show the galaxy that even the mighty Vale line could choose peace when it served them. She organized a grand gathering aboard Halcyon Station, a neutral outpost built specifically for occasions like this, floating quietly between our territories and theirs. Dignitaries from a dozen worlds would attend. My mother would attend. I would attend, and Daniel would stand beside me as living proof that the Sovereign Compact welcomed even the smallest, gentlest species into its fold. I remember dressing for the event that evening, the ceremonial fabric heavy on my shoulders, the weight of my house's colors pressing down on me the way it always did before public appearances. Daniel stood behind me in the mirror, adjusting his own formal jacket, that same old gray cloak folded carefully and packed away in his travel case, as if he could not imagine attending without it nearby. I asked him if he was nervous. He said he was always a little nervous before events like this, but that he would be fine as long as I was close. I believed him completely. I thought his nervousness came from being surrounded by powerful strangers who saw him as insignificant. I never once imagined that the nervousness I saw in his eyes that evening was not fear of the crowd at all. It was something closer to readiness. I did not understand that yet. I would not understand it until the lights of Halcyon Station flickered, until the music stopped mid-note, until the calm surface of that celebration cracked apart in a single heartbeat and revealed the danger hiding beneath it. But that night, walking beside my husband toward the transport that would carry us to the station, I still believed the same thing I had believed since the day I met him. I believed Daniel Ashcroft was harmless. I would learn the truth soon enough, and when I did, it would change everything I thought I understood about strength, about weakness, and about the man I had married without ever truly knowing him. For now, though, I only remember the quiet hum of the transport engines, the soft weight of his hand resting near mine, and the last few moments of a peace I did not yet know was about to be broken. I remember thinking, foolishly, that nothing about that evening could possibly surprise me. I could not have been more wrong. The music on Halcyon Station was already playing when we arrived, a slow, formal melody meant to calm nerves and soften the tension between two former enemies now forced to smile at each other. I remember the smell of the place first, something like warm metal and imported flowers, the scent stations always use to make guests forget they are floating in the emptiness of space. My mother stood near the center of the grand hall, dressed in the deep crimson of House Vale, greeting delegates from the rival alliance with the practiced grace of a woman who had spent her entire life performing peace even when she did not feel it. I stood beside Daniel near the edge of the room, watching the crowd, doing what I always did at these events, which was measure every guest for weakness or threat. I did not measure Daniel that way. I never had. It never occurred to me that the person standing closest to me might be worth measuring at all. He looked calm that night, calmer than usual, in a way I now understand differently than I did then. At the time, I thought he was simply comfortable, finally used to these grand, human, unfriendly gatherings after 2 years of practice. Looking back, I recognize it as something else. He was not comfortable. He was alert. There is a difference between a man who has stopped noticing danger and a man who has learned to hide the fact that he is always noticing it. I remember him leaning close to me at one point and asking quietly which exits I preferred in a room like this. I laughed, thinking it was some kind of joke, a nervous human habit of small talk. I told him the East Corridor, since it led directly to the docking bay. He nodded, said nothing else, and continued watching the crowd with that same gentle, unreadable expression he always wore. I did not think about that exchange again until it was almost too late to matter. The gathering moved through its expected stages. Toasts were made. Old rivals exchanged stiff but polite words. My mother gave a speech about unity between the Sovereign Compact and the neighboring alliance, about how strength was not always found in weapons, but sometimes in the willingness to lay them down. I remember thinking the words sounded beautiful and empty at the same time, the kind of thing rulers say when they want history to remember them kindly. Daniel listened carefully to every word, his eyes tracking the room the entire time, though I mistook this for simple curiosity about a culture not his own. It was near the middle of the evening, just as the orchestra began a second slow piece, that I first noticed something wrong. It was small at first, the kind of detail only someone raised around danger would catch. Two of the rival delegation's personal guards had left their posts near the entrance and were moving quietly along the outer wall of the hall, away from the crowd, toward the private corridor that led to the station's central systems. I glanced at my mother's own guards, expecting them to notice as well, but they were focused on the main floor, on the obvious threats, the ones standing in plain sight. I opened my mouth to say something to Daniel, to point out what I had seen, but he was already looking in that same direction. He had noticed before I had. Before I could speak, the lights along the ceiling flickered once, then steadied. A small thing, the kind of thing you might dismiss as a minor power fluctuation on an aging station. But I saw Daniel's jaw tighten, just slightly, and I saw his hand move toward the fold of his jacket where, I now realize, something had been hidden the entire evening. The second flicker came moments later, longer this time, and the music stumbled to a stop as the orchestra members exchanged confused glances. A ripple of unease moved through the crowd, the kind that spreads quickly among people trained to sense danger even when they cannot yet name it. Then the far doors of the hall burst open. I will not pretend I remember every detail clearly, because fear has a strange way of blurring moments together, but I remember the sudden rush of armored figures pouring into the room, wearing the colors of a faction I recognized instantly, a splinter group from within the rival alliance itself, one that had never accepted the peace treaty, one that believed my mother's diplomacy was a weakness to be punished rather than a gesture to be honored. Screams broke out across the hall. Guests scattered in every direction. Formal gowns and jackets tangled together as people pushed toward exits that were already being blocked. My mother's personal guards moved to form a defensive ring around her, shouting orders, weapons drawn, but the attackers had planned this well. They had cut the station's central power lines just enough to disable half the automated defense systems, and they had already disabled several of our guards near the corridor entrances before the main assault even began. I froze. I admit that without shame, because I believe anyone would have frozen in that moment. My entire life had prepared me for political danger, for subtle betrayal, for careful maneuvering behind closed doors. Nothing had prepared me for the sudden physical chaos of an attack meant to kill. I remember reaching for Daniel's arm, some instinct in me expecting to protect him, to pull him toward the exit he had asked me about earlier that very evening, as if some part of me still believed I would need to be the one shielding him. Instead, I felt him step in front of me. It happened so quickly that my mind struggled to process it. One moment he was beside me, the next he was between me and the nearest attacker, his old gray cloak thrown open, revealing something hidden along his side that I had never once noticed in 2 years of marriage. My breath caught in my throat as I heard a sound I will never forget for the rest of my life, a smooth, deliberate sound, metal sliding free of its sheath. A blade, my gentle, soft-spoken human husband, the man my court mocked as harmless, the man I myself had underestimated every single day since our wedding, had a sword in his hand, and he was already moving. I could not understand what I was seeing. My mind, trained for years to recognize the shape of danger, refused to accept that the shape standing in front of me now belonged to the same man who had asked me gently that morning if I had slept well. The nearest attacker lunged toward us, weapon raised, clearly expecting an easy target in the soft human diplomat standing in his path. I remember opening my mouth to scream a warning, though I am not sure now whether the warning was meant for Daniel or for the attacker himself. Daniel moved before I could finish the thought. There was no hesitation in him, none of the nervous uncertainty I had seen him display so often in social settings. His movements were precise, economical, almost unnervingly calm, as if his body remembered something his gentle smile had never once revealed to me. The attacker's weapon was turned aside, and within a heartbeat the man was disarmed and forced back, stumbling away from us both. I stood frozen, staring at my husband's back, at the way he positioned himself between me and every new threat entering the hall, at the way his breathing remained steady even as chaos exploded around us. Around the wider hall, my mother's guards fought desperately to hold their ground, and I could hear my mother's voice cutting through the noise, sharp and commanding, ordering her people to protect the civilian guests first. I wanted to run to her, to help however I could, but Daniel's arm shifted slightly, keeping me positioned safely behind him without ever taking his focus off the threats ahead. Another attacker came from the side, faster than the first, clearly more experienced, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I believed I was about to watch my husband fall in front of me, the illusion of his hidden strength shattering as quickly as it had appeared. Instead, he turned to meet the new threat with the same eerie calm, his blade rising to intercept the attack before it could land, and I realized, with a cold shock running through my chest, that this was not a lucky reaction. This was practiced. This was trained. This was something he had clearly done before, perhaps many times, long before I ever knew him. I thought of the calluses on his hands that I had once mistaken for the marks of some human hobby. I thought of the way he always positioned himself near exits at gatherings, the way he flinched at sudden loud sounds, the way he never fully slept even beside me in our own chambers. Every strange detail I had dismissed as simple human quirks suddenly rearranged themselves into a pattern I had been too blind or too arrogant to see. The fighting around us seemed to stretch on forever, though I later learned it lasted only a few short minutes before my mother's remaining guards regained control of the hall, before station security finally restored full power and sealed the compromised corridors, before the surviving attackers were either captured or driven back toward the docking bay they had used to board the station. Through all of it, Daniel remained exactly where he had placed himself from the very first moment, shielding me, moving only when necessary, conserving his strength with a discipline that felt almost unnatural coming from a man I had spent 2 years believing incapable of violence. When the chaos finally began to settle, when the guards regained the floor and the remaining attackers were subdued, I became aware of an unsettling quiet spreading through the hall, the kind of silence that follows sudden violence, filled with ragged breathing and the soft sounds of people checking whether they were truly safe. I looked at Daniel's back, still turned protectively toward the retreating attackers, his blade lowered but not yet sheathed, his shoulders rising and falling with slow, controlled breaths that betrayed no panic at all. Slowly, carefully, he turned to face me. His eyes were the same gentle eyes I had looked into 1,000 times before, the same eyes that asked about my day, that softened whenever I was upset, that had never once, in 2 years, given me any reason to suspect what I had just witnessed with my own eyes. But now those eyes held something else as well, something steady and unfamiliar, something that made my breath catch all over again. I realized, standing there in the wreckage of what should have been a peaceful celebration, that I had married a man I did not actually know at all. And I understood, with a chill that had nothing to do with the station's damaged environmental systems, that I was about to learn exactly who Daniel Ashcroft truly was. For a moment, neither of us moved. The hall around us was filled with overturned tables, scattered glassware, and the low murmur of frightened guests being gathered by station security into a corner near the far wall. Smoke curled faintly from a damaged control panel near the entrance, and somewhere behind me I could hear my mother's voice, steady and commanding, directing her remaining guards to secure the perimeter. Daniel finally lowered his blade fully, though he did not sheath it. His eyes stayed on the retreating attackers being pulled back by arriving station security, watching them the way a person watches a fire they are not yet convinced has been fully extinguished. I found my voice before I found the strength to move. "Daniel," I said, and my own voice sounded strange to me, thinner than usual, as if fear had hollowed something out of it. "What was that?" He glanced at me, and for the briefest moment, something flickered across his face, something that looked almost like guilt, though it vanished quickly beneath the same calm expression he always wore. "Are you hurt?" he asked instead of answering me, his eyes moving quickly over my arms, my shoulders, checking for injury with the same practiced efficiency he had used moments earlier against armed attackers. "I am fine," I said, though I was not entirely certain that was true. My hands were shaking, though not from any wound. "You had a sword. You have never once shown me a sword. You have never once told me you knew how to use one." He did not answer immediately. Around us, station security continued restoring order, sealing corridors, gathering the wounded, separating captured attackers from frightened guests. My mother's personal guard captain, a broad, scarred warrior named Elwyn Hask, approached quickly, his weapon still drawn, his eyes moving between Daniel and the fallen attackers with an expression I had never seen him wear before, something between confusion and reluctant respect. "You dropped 3 of them before we even reached this side of the hall," Hask said, addressing Daniel directly, his voice rough with disbelief. "I have trained soldiers under my command who could not have done that." Daniel's expression remained calm, almost apologetic. "I did what was necessary," he said simply, offering nothing further. Hask studied him a moment longer, then turned to check on the nearby guests, clearly deciding this was not the time to press for explanations. I wished, in that moment, that I possessed the same discipline, because my mind was a storm of questions I could not silence. My mother arrived a few moments later, flanked by 2 remaining guards, her crimson gown torn slightly at the shoulder, though she appeared otherwise unharmed. Her sharp eyes swept the scene, taking in the fallen attackers, the damaged hall, and finally landing on Daniel, still holding his blade loosely at his side. For the first time since I had known her, I saw something close to surprise cross my mother's face. "Ambassador Ashcroft," she said slowly, using his formal title, though her tone carried none of the dismissive amusement she usually reserved for him. "It appears you have been keeping secrets from your new family." Daniel bowed his head respectfully, though I noticed he did not fully sheath his weapon until the last of the attackers had been secured by station guards. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," he said quietly. "This was not how I intended to reveal anything." My mother's eyes narrowed slightly, studying him the way she studied treaties before signing them, searching for hidden clauses. "Reveal what, exactly?" He did not answer her directly, and I found myself grateful for that small mercy, because I did not yet know if I was ready to hear the answer myself, not surrounded by wreckage and frightened guests and the lingering scent of smoke. Station security continued their work around us, and slowly the hall began to settle into the tense quiet that follows any sudden violence, the kind of silence filled with too many unanswered questions. I found myself staring at Daniel's hands, the same hands that had poured wine for guests only an hour earlier, the same hands I had once thought incapable of anything rougher than turning the pages of a book. Now those hands held a blade with the ease of long familiarity, and I could not reconcile the 2 images in my mind. Memories began surfacing unbidden, small fragments I had dismissed over the past 2 years without ever questioning them. I remembered the early days of our marriage, when Daniel had once mentioned, almost in passing, something about the old wars back home, before quickly changing the subject to something lighter. I remembered dismissing it at the time, assuming he meant some minor historical conflict from Earth's distant past, the kind humans studied in school books. I had never asked him to explain further, and he had never offered to. I remembered the calluses along his palms and fingers, rough in places that made no sense for a diplomat's son who spent his days in meetings and formal dinners. I had once asked him about them, and he had simply said he enjoyed working with his hands, that it helped him think. I had accepted the answer without question, because it had never occurred to me that there might be another explanation. I remembered the way he always chose seats near exits, the way his eyes would flick toward doorways whenever we entered unfamiliar rooms, the way he positioned himself slightly ahead of me whenever we walked through crowded spaces, always angled just enough to place his body between me and anything unexpected. I had thought these were simply small quirks of his personality, harmless habits that made him seem endearingly attentive. Now I understood they were something else entirely. They were the habits of a man who had spent a significant portion of his life expecting danger, trained to notice threats before they fully arrived, disciplined enough to hide that training beneath a gentle smile for 2 full years without ever once slipping. I looked at him now, standing amid the wreckage of the hall, and I felt something shift inside me, a strange mixture of fear, confusion, and a reluctant, unwelcome flicker of awe. "How long?" I finally asked, my voice quieter now, meant only for him. "How long have you been hiding this from me?" Daniel's eyes softened, though the alertness in them never fully faded, even now, even with the immediate danger apparently past. "Since before we met," he said. "It was never something I could simply tell you over dinner, Surindra, not without context, not without you understanding what it actually meant." "And what does it mean?" I asked, though part of me feared the answer. He glanced around the hall, at the guards still securing the perimeter, at my mother watching us both with sharp, calculating eyes, at the frightened guests being escorted toward the medical bay for examination. "This is not the place," he said gently. "Please, let me explain everything once we are somewhere safer." I wanted to argue, to demand answers immediately, but something in his tone told me this was not simple deflection. This was caution, the same careful discipline he had shown throughout the entire attack, the same discipline that had likely kept both of us alive. My mother, still watching the exchange closely, finally spoke again, her voice carrying the authority of a ruler assessing a sudden and unexpected asset. "Ambassador Ashcroft," she said, "you will accompany my guards for questioning once the station is fully secured. Whatever you have been concealing, I expect a full account before this night is finished." Daniel bowed again, more formally this time. "Of course, Your Majesty. I owe you and your daughter that much, at the very least." Station security continued clearing the hall over the following hour, and I remained close to Daniel throughout, watching him with new eyes, seeing details I had somehow overlooked for 2 entire years. The way his posture remained subtly alert, even in stillness. The way his gaze continued sweeping the room out of habit long after the immediate danger had passed. The way the other guards, once dismissive of him, now watched him with a wary, uncertain respect. Captain Hask approached again as the last of the wounded were carried toward the medical wing, his expression thoughtful. "3 attackers disarmed in under a minute," he said, mostly to himself, though clearly intended for me to hear. "I have seen trained soldiers struggle to manage that in a live engagement. Whoever trained him, Your Highness, trained him well." I did not answer, because I did not yet have an answer to give. I simply watched my husband continue helping station security guide frightened guests toward safety, his movements gentle again now, his voice soft and reassuring as he spoke to a trembling young attendant who had been caught near the initial breach. It was strange, watching him shift so easily between the 2 versions of himself I now knew existed, the calm, controlled fighter from moments earlier, and the gentle, reassuring presence I had known for 2 years. I began to wonder how much of the second version had ever been a performance, and how much of it was simply another true side of the same complicated man. Eventually, once the hall had been cleared and the immediate crisis resolved, my mother's guards escorted us to a private security chamber deeper within the station, a small, quiet room meant for sensitive discussions away from prying ears. My mother followed shortly after, her expression unreadable, though I could tell she was already forming her own theories about what Daniel might reveal. I sat beside him in that quiet room, still shaken, still processing everything I had witnessed, while my mother took her seat across from us, her sharp eyes fixed firmly on the man she had once dismissed as a harmless political gesture. "Ambassador Ashcroft," she said finally, her voice calm but firm. "I believe it is time you told us exactly who you are, and exactly what your species has been hiding from the rest of the galaxy." Daniel exhaled slowly, glancing at me first, his eyes carrying something between apology and quiet resolve. "You are right," he said finally. "It is time you both knew the truth." I remember my heart pounding in that silence, caught somewhere between fear and desperate curiosity, unsure whether I was about to learn something that would terrify me or something that would finally help me understand the man I had married without ever truly knowing. Either way, I knew there was no going back to the comfortable ignorance I had lived in for the past 2 years. The truth was about to change everything. Daniel sat quietly for a long moment, choosing his words the way a man chooses his footing on unstable ground. The small security chamber felt smaller still with my mother's sharp attention fixed on him, and I found myself holding my breath, waiting for whatever truth he was about to share. "When my people were first contacted by the wider galaxy," he began, "your scholars studied us quickly, and they drew conclusions just as quickly. They saw a species without star fleets, without any presence beyond our own solar system, and they assumed that meant weakness. They assumed a species that had not yet reached the stars must be gentle, harmless, easily absorbed into existing power structures without causing trouble." He paused, glancing briefly at my mother before continuing. "What they failed to study closely enough was our history before contact. Humanity spent thousands of years fighting itself. We fought over land, over resources, over beliefs, over pride. We built weapons capable of ending entire cities in moments, long before we ever developed the technology to leave our own atmosphere safely. By the time your explorers found us, we had already spent generations learning, through terrible cost, exactly how far violence could be pushed, and exactly how disciplined a person needed to become to survive it." I listened, stunned, trying to reconcile this description with the sheltered, peaceful image of humanity my own people had built in their minds. "Your scholars saw a young species and assumed young meant weak," Daniel continued. "But young does not mean untested. My people entered galactic society already carrying centuries of hard experience in combat, strategy, and survival. We simply chose, as a species, not to advertise that experience openly. It seemed wiser to let ourselves be underestimated while we learned more about the civilizations surrounding us." "And you," my mother said quietly, her voice carrying none of its earlier dismissiveness, "where do you fit into this?" Daniel's eyes flickered with something distant, the look of a man remembering things he did not often speak of. "Before the marriage was arranged," he said, "I served in a specialized division of Earth's defense forces. Not a large public military, nothing your scanners would have flagged as significant. A small, quiet unit, trained specifically for situations exactly like tonight. Protection details, close combat, extraction under pressure. We trained with traditional weapons as much as modern ones, partly out of respect for older methods, partly because a blade never runs out of power and never fails when energy systems are disrupted, the way they were tonight. I thought of the drawn blade, the way it had moved with practiced precision through the chaos of the attack, the way it had never once faltered, even as the station's power flickered unpredictably around us. When the marriage was proposed," Daniel continued, "my superiors saw an opportunity. A human presence inside the Sovereign Compact's royal family, someone capable of protecting that family if the need ever arose, without revealing exactly what humanity was truly capable of. I volunteered for the assignment." "You volunteered," I repeated, my voice quieter than I intended. "To marry a stranger, to hide who you were for years. Why?" Daniel turned to look at me directly, and for the first time since the attack, I saw something raw beneath his usual calm expression, something that looked almost like vulnerability. "Because peace is fragile, Surindra. I have seen what happens when two powerful civilizations misjudge each other, when pride and fear push people toward violence that could have been avoided. My superiors believed, and I came to believe as well, that quiet protection was more valuable than open displays of strength. I did not want my presence beside you to be seen as a threat. I wanted it to be seen exactly as it was labeled, a gesture of peace. But I also could not, in good conscience, leave you unprotected if that peace was ever tested. My mother studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, though I could see calculation working steadily behind her sharp eyes. "You allowed my court to mock you," she said slowly. "You allowed my own guards to underestimate you. You allowed my daughter herself to believe you incapable of defending yourself, or her." "Yes," Daniel admitted, without hesitation or shame. "It was necessary. Had the wrong people learned what I truly was capable of, tonight's attack might never have happened in the way it did, but a different kind of danger might have emerged instead, one aimed specifically at neutralizing me before I could ever serve my purpose. Hiding my training protected everyone, including Surindra." I sat with that for a long moment, turning the truth over carefully in my mind, feeling something shift inside me that I could not immediately name. 2 years of quiet condescension, 2 years of pitying the gentle human husband I believed I had been burdened with, and the entire time he had been standing beside me exactly the way a shield stands beside the person it protects, silent, unnoticed, until the moment it was needed most. "Why tell us now?" my mother asked. "You could have continued concealing this. The attackers were subdued. No one beyond this room needs to know the full truth of what happened tonight." Daniel shook his head slowly. "Because concealment has limits, Your Majesty. Tonight proved that threats against your family are real, and likely to continue given the factions still opposed to peace. If I am to protect Surindra properly moving forward, I cannot continue operating in secrecy from the people I am meant to protect. Trust requires honesty, even when honesty is uncomfortable." I found myself studying him now with entirely new eyes, seeing not the gentle, harmless diplomat's son my court had mocked for 2 years, but a man who had willingly accepted quiet humiliation, willingly endured condescension from an entire empire, simply to fulfill a duty he believed in deeply enough to sacrifice his own pride for it. "You let me pity you," I said quietly, the words escaping before I could stop them. "You let me believe you were weak." Daniel's expression softened, something gentle and apologetic settling into his features. "I let you believe what was safest for both of us," he said. "I never wanted your pity, Surindra. I simply accepted it as a necessary cost. What I wanted, more than anything, was for you to be safe, whether or not you ever understood why." The room fell quiet for a long moment, and I became aware of my own heartbeat, steady now after the earlier chaos, though my mind still raced through everything I had just learned. My mother finally rose from her seat, smoothing the torn fabric of her sleeve with practiced composure, her expression thoughtful rather than hostile. "This changes things considerably," she said. "The Sovereign Compact has always measured strength through open displays of power. It seems your species measures it differently. We measure strength through restraint, as much as capability," Daniel said quietly. "Anyone can cause harm. Choosing not to, until the moment it becomes truly necessary, requires a different kind of discipline entirely." My mother studied him a moment longer, then turned to address me directly. "Surindra, I trust you understand the significance of what has been revealed tonight. Your marriage was arranged as a symbolic gesture. It appears, symbolism aside, you have gained something far more valuable than any of us anticipated." I did not answer immediately, because I was still processing the weight of everything Daniel had shared, still reconciling the gentle husband I thought I knew with the disciplined protector who had stood between me and armed attackers without a moment's hesitation. Later that night, once my mother had left to coordinate the ongoing investigation into the attack, Daniel and I remained alone in the quiet security chamber, the adrenaline of the evening finally beginning to fade into something closer to exhaustion. "I owe you a real apology," Daniel said softly, breaking the silence between us. "Not for protecting you tonight, but for the years of secrecy before it. You deserved honesty from the beginning, even if the timing was never simple." I studied him carefully, This man I had shared a home with for 2 years without ever truly knowing him. I do not know whether to be angry with you or grateful, I admitted honestly. Perhaps both. Both is fair, Daniel said, a faint, tired smile crossing his face. I would understand if you needed time before deciding how you feel about any of this. I thought about the mockery my own court had directed at him for 2 years, mockery I had allowed, even quietly encouraged through my own dismissive attitude. I thought about the quiet dignity with which he had endured it, never once defending himself, never once revealing the truth that would have silenced every insult instantly. You could have proven them wrong at any moment, I said slowly. You chose not to. Pride is a poor reason to break cover, Daniel said simply. Protecting you mattered more than protecting my reputation among people who had already decided what they believed about me. I sat with that thought for a long moment, feeling something shift deeper inside me, something beyond simple gratitude or lingering shock. For the first time since our wedding, I found myself genuinely curious about the man sitting beside me, wanting to understand not just what he was capable of, but who he truly was beneath years of careful, deliberate restraint. Tell me everything, I said finally. Not tonight, perhaps, but eventually, I want to understand the man I actually married. Daniel nodded slowly, something warm and relieved settling into his expression. I would like that very much, he said. I have wanted to share more of myself with you for a long time, Surindra. I simply never knew how to begin. Outside the chamber, station security continued clearing the last of the wreckage from the Grand Hall, and somewhere within the depths of Halcyon Station, my mother's advisors were already drafting reports that would reach every corner of the Sovereign Compact by morning, reports that would force an empire built on visible strength to reconsider everything it believed about the quiet, gentle species it had once dismissed as harmless. I did not yet know how the wider galaxy would react to the truth that was about to spread. I did not yet know how my own court would adjust to seeing Daniel differently, but sitting there beside him in that quiet room, still shaken from everything the night had revealed, I understood one thing with absolute certainty. The husband I had pitied for 2 years was gone. In his place sat a man I was only just beginning to truly know, and despite everything, despite the fear and the shock and the lingering questions still unanswered, I found myself wanting to know him further. Whatever came next, I would face it beside him, and for the first time since our wedding, that thought did not feel like a political obligation. It felt, instead, like something closer to hope. 3 days after the attack on Halcyon Station, a new danger arrived, though this one carried no blade and wore no armor. It arrived instead in the form of whispers moving quickly through the halls of my mother's palace, whispers questioning whether a human warrior hidden inside the royal family represented a threat rather than a protection. I learned of it first from Captain Hask, who found me in the eastern courtyard early one morning, his expression grim despite the warmth of the season. Your cousin has been speaking with several senior officers, he said without preamble. Lord Vex Turnoth believes the ambassador's concealed training makes him dangerous rather than trustworthy. He is gathering support to have Daniel formally investigated, perhaps even removed from the palace. I felt anger flare instantly, sharp and immediate. Vex Turnoth, the same cousin who had mocked Daniel openly at a formal dinner months earlier, now sought to punish him for the very skill that had likely saved my mother's life, and my own, aboard that station. I found Vex later that same day in the officers' training hall, surrounded by a small cluster of sympathetic nobles, all of them speaking in low, urgent tones that stopped abruptly the moment I entered. "Cousin," I said, keeping my voice level despite the tension coiling tightly in my chest, "I understand you have concerns regarding my husband." Vex straightened, his expression carefully neutral, though I could see calculation working behind his eyes. "Concern seems a gentle word, Surindra. A man capable of disarming trained attackers within seconds has been living inside our palace for 2 years, undetected by our own intelligence networks. I believe that warrants serious scrutiny, regardless of whose life he happened to save." "He saved my mother's life," I said sharply. "He saved mine as well. Scrutiny seems a strange reward for that. Gratitude does not erase risk, Vex countered. If a human can hide such capability from us for 2 full years, what else might his species be concealing? What else might he himself be concealing, even now? I opened my mouth to argue further, but a familiar, calm voice spoke from the doorway behind me. "A fair question," Daniel said, stepping into the training hall with the same quiet composure I had once mistaken for simple gentleness. "Perhaps I should answer it myself, rather than allow rumors to answer it for me." Vex turned to face him directly, clearly startled by his sudden appearance, though he recovered his composure quickly. "Ambassador, how convenient. Perhaps you can explain exactly why you found it necessary to deceive an entire empire for 2 years." "I did not deceive anyone regarding my intentions," Daniel said calmly. "I withheld information regarding my training, for reasons I have already explained to the Empress and to Serindra directly. My intentions, from the very beginning, have been to protect this family and to honor the peace this marriage was meant to represent. And we are simply meant to trust that," Vex said, his tone sharpening with barely restrained hostility. "You are meant to judge me by my actions," Daniel replied evenly. 3 nights ago, I placed myself between armed attackers and your Empress's family, at considerable personal risk, without hesitation. I did not use that opportunity to seize power, to demand recognition, or to threaten anyone within this palace. I simply did what was necessary, and then stepped quietly back into the role I have held for 2 years. If deception were truly my intention, Lord Turnoth, I suspect my actions would look quite different by now." The training hall fell silent, several of the gathered nobles exchanging uncertain glances. I watched Vex carefully, waiting to see whether pride would push him toward further confrontation, but something in Daniel's calm, measured response seemed to blunt the edge of his earlier hostility. "Perhaps," Vex said finally, his tone considerably cooler than before, "the Empress should decide how this matter proceeds, rather than settling it here in a training hall." "I agree completely," Daniel said. "I have never sought to avoid her judgment." Vex left shortly after, taking his small cluster of supporters with him, though I could see the tension had not fully dissolved, only postponed itself toward a larger confrontation still to come. That confrontation arrived 2 days later, when my mother summoned the full royal court to address the matter formally. I remember standing beside Daniel in the Grand Assembly Hall, the same style of hall where the attack aboard Halcyon Station had unfolded, though this time the danger was political rather than physical. My mother sat upon her throne, her expression composed and unreadable, addressing the gathered nobles with the same commanding presence she used whenever matters of state required absolute clarity. "3 nights ago," she began, "this family was saved from a coordinated assassination attempt by a man many of you dismissed as harmless. I confess, I dismissed him in much the same way. It appears we were mistaken, and I believe it is time this court acknowledged that mistake honestly." Murmurs rippled through the assembled nobles, though my mother continued before the murmurs could grow into open debate. "Lord Turnoth has raised legitimate concerns regarding concealed capability within our own walls," she continued. "I do not dismiss those concerns lightly. However, I have reviewed the full investigation into the attack, alongside detailed accounts from Captain Hask and station security. Ambassador Ashcroft's actions that night were entirely defensive, entirely restrained, and entirely aligned with the peace this marriage was meant to represent." She paused, allowing her words to settle over the gathered court before continuing. "I have also reviewed additional information regarding humanity's history, provided voluntarily by Ambassador Ashcroft himself, information many of you will receive in full detail following this assembly. It appears our scholars significantly underestimated this species, mistaking their quiet diplomacy for weakness rather than deliberate restraint." I watched Vex's expression carefully, noting the tight set of his jaw, though he remained silent, clearly unwilling to challenge my mother directly in open assembly. "Effective immediately," my mother continued, "Ambassador Daniel Ashcroft will be formally recognized as a protector of the royal family, granted appropriate authority, and resources to fulfill that role openly, rather than in secrecy. This court will treat him, and by extension his species, with the respect such capability and restraint clearly deserves. A wave of quiet acknowledgement moved through the assembled nobles, some clearly more reluctant than others, though none openly challenged my mother's ruling. I felt a surge of quiet pride watching Daniel receive this recognition, knowing how much restraint and sacrifice had led to this single moment. In the weeks that followed, the political landscape within the Sovereign Compact shifted in ways I could not have imagined only months earlier. Reports of the attack, and of Daniel's role in preventing greater tragedy, spread quickly through diplomatic channels, connecting our systems to dozens of other civilizations. Humanity, once dismissed as a minor, harmless species barely worth serious consideration, suddenly found itself the subject of careful, cautious reassessment across the galaxy. I watched this shift unfold with a strange mixture of pride and quiet unease, understanding that the galaxy's perception of humanity would never return fully to what it had been before. Some civilizations responded with renewed respect, eager to strengthen diplomatic ties with a species that had proven far more capable than anyone anticipated. Others responded with quiet suspicion, wondering what other capabilities humanity might still be concealing beneath its gentle diplomatic surface. Daniel remained remarkably unaffected by the growing attention, continuing his duties with the same calm humility he had always shown, though he no longer hid the truth of his training when circumstances required it. I noticed subtle changes in how he carried himself now, small things that only someone who knew him closely would recognize. He no longer flinched quite as sharply at sudden sounds, no longer positioned himself quite so carefully near exits in every room we entered. It was as though releasing the burden of secrecy had allowed him to relax, if only slightly, into a version of himself he had not been able to fully show me before. One evening, several weeks after the assembly, I found him sitting quietly in our private chambers, his old gray cloak folded neatly on the table beside him, no longer hidden away, but simply resting there, a familiar object rather than a carefully guarded secret. "You seem lighter," I said, settling beside him. Since everything was revealed, Daniel considered this for a moment before answering. "I spent a long time carrying a weight I could not share with you," he said. "It is a relief, honestly, to no longer need to measure every word, every gesture, every choice, against the fear of revealing too much." "I wish you had trusted me sooner," I admitted quietly, "though I understand why you could not." "I trusted you completely," Daniel said, turning to look at me directly. "I simply did not trust the wider circumstances surrounding us. That is a different thing entirely." I thought about the 2 years I had spent pitying him, dismissing him, believing him harmless simply because he chose gentleness over displays of strength. I thought about how wrong I had been, not simply about his capabilities, but about what true strength actually meant. "I used to believe strength meant showing everyone exactly how dangerous you could be," I said slowly. "I am beginning to understand it might mean something closer to what you showed me. Choosing restraint, even when you possess the power to do otherwise." Daniel reached for my hand, his fingers rough with calluses I now understood completely, calluses earned through years of discipline rather than idle habit. "Strength without restraint is simply chaos waiting for an excuse," he said quietly. "I would rather spend my life protecting the people I love quietly than spend it proving my strength to people who never truly needed convincing." I found myself smiling, something warm settling into my chest despite the lingering tension still surrounding our new circumstances. "My mother has already begun discussing expanded diplomatic ties with your homeworld," I said. "It seems humanity's quiet entrance into galactic politics will not remain quiet for very much longer." "No," Daniel agreed, a faint smile crossing his own face. "I suspect it will not." I thought about everything that had changed since that night aboard Halcyon Station, the fear, the shock, the slow, difficult process of understanding a man I thought I already knew completely. I thought about the mockery he had endured, the quiet dignity with which he had carried himself through years of underestimation, and the steady, unwavering protection he had offered me even when I gave him no reason to believe I deserved it. I no longer pitied Daniel Ashcroft. I no longer saw him as the harmless gesture my mother had arranged simply to satisfy political optics. I saw him now for exactly who he was, a man capable of great and terrible violence, who chose, every single day, gentleness instead. That choice, I had come to understand, required far more strength than simply being dangerous ever could. As the weeks turned into months, our marriage settled into something neither of us had anticipated when it first began, no longer a political arrangement built on convenience and quiet dismissal, but something closer to genuine partnership, built on hard-won trust and mutual respect. The wider galaxy continued adjusting to the truth about humanity, some civilizations reaching out eagerly for closer ties, others watching cautiously from a distance, uncertain what other surprises this small, quiet species might still be hiding. I suspected, given everything I had learned about Daniel and his people, that humanity's full story was far from finished unfolding. But whatever challenges awaited the Sovereign Compact, and whatever surprises humanity still had left to reveal, I found myself facing the future with a confidence I had not expected to feel only months earlier. I was no longer simply the Empress's daughter, bound by duty to a marriage I once viewed as beneath my station. I was the wife of a man capable of extraordinary strength, who chose quiet protection over open displays of power, and who had proven, in the single most terrifying moment of my life, exactly how much that quiet strength was truly worth. Whatever came next for the Sovereign Compact, for humanity, and for the delicate peace between our worlds, I intended to face it standing beside him, and for the first time since our wedding day, that thought did not feel like duty. It felt like home.